Hot Water History, episode 197, Wednesday night, first episode of 2026. Richard, what's going on?
Venezuela. And interesting to note too that I had forgotten about Greenland for a moment, and now Greenland.
They're back in.
We're gonna buy it. We're gonna buy it. None of this is with any type of constitutional authority or congressional approval or even oversight. And yeah, it's remarkable how absolutely displaced and distant Donald Trump is from really anything he campaigned upon. It's as though it's one thing that you never get what they promise in a campaign, but to engage in and be so utterly preoccupied by pursuits that are totally divorced from and oftentimes antagonistic of the promises. It's one thing to ignore the campaign promises, yeah, just so as to win voter constituencies, but to so utterly obviate your presidency of and to totally avoid uh in or to act in such contrary ways to what your whole political modus operandi was supposed to be is quite quite wild. The president of peace. That's what he'll be remembered for as he starts wars and engages in them without congressional approval.
Before we talk more on this, did you have any resolutions for the New Year's?
Resolutions for the New Year's. Got to get that book written. That's resolution
That's a
number
big
one.
one.
That's a big one. Resolution number two. I didn't really think of it. One, to tell you the truth. I mean, I'm pretty happy with how life's unfolding and how I'll always be content with how God sees grace playing out in my life. As Thomas Aquinas said, is grace perfecting nature. And I just pray for, as I do pretty much every day. It doesn't matter the year or the calendar, that I'm compliant and both pliant and active in cooperating with that. How about you?
Trying to get to daily mass more,
Okay.
trying to read more,
Mm. Hmm.
and trying to be a little more organized around the apartment. Just sometimes you get some things. I got like a whole pile of Amazon boxes
Ah. Hmm.
I gotta get rid of. Stuff like that.
Yeah, but you keep them around. They might have a use. Yeah, is that why you keep them around, or
No,
just?
that's I got a couple that might have use, but they
Uh,
gotta. I'm gonna be more of a minimalist, like our buddy
okay.
TK in
Yeah,
2026.
TK would be very happy to hear that.
Yeah, a lot of clutter that I gotta get rid of. I've got a dead plant here still.
Yeah, brown thumb.
Yeah, but
You know you have to water them.
it
Give
it's
them
it was
sunlight.
one of those silly peace lilies from the church, actually.
Oh, okay.
It's they're like the goldfish of plants.
Hmm. Yes, that's true. Or did you just kill it by singing St. Louis Jesuit songs like "Let There Be Peace on Earth"?
Spiritually, it gave up.
Yes.
Spiritually, it wilted.
And let it begin with me, and the flower just goes
Yeah,
wilts.
yeah. It actually got a little too much sunlight, I found out
Ooh,
before
it
it was
got
too late.
roasted.
Before it was too late, yeah.
Okay. So should we talk more?
We'll be better next time. Yeah, let's talk Venezuela.
Talk Venezuela. Mhm. So of course we know by now that this U.S. operation has taken place, and a foreign sovereign leader who, just because the U.S. says and various U.S. administrations have said he's illegitimate, does not make it so, right? It's like this reality through fiat that seems to be. I mean, how drunk on inordinate power do you have to be as any individual? I guess it's explainable because you're in politics and you're the head of the state, so you're already a megalomaniac for the most part, especially in democratic states, because your ascendancy to power is dependent upon just pure popularity. So you can understand why there's a tendency toward hedonistic egotism. But so you have this idea that, well, it's actually not very different from when people say, well, personhood for a in utero human, i.e., a baby in the womb, is conferred when I decide I want the baby. It's like conferred through accepted legitimacy. Is that's when the baby becomes a person. Otherwise, they're discarded and thus can be characterized as a clump of cells or something along those lines. Yeah, despite all scientific evidence to the contrary. Same thing here. This isn't really a war; it's a police action, but it's carried out by the U.S. military and Delta forces, and it's totally contrary to international law, which is used as a convenient reason and excuse for why Russia and conversely, well, why Russia's bad for attacking a state, but uh, doesn't apply at all to Israel the same standards. I mean, it's just what kind of convoluted logic. It's really quite interesting to see that Trump and all of those in his coterie of yes men and women, gals, Caroline Leavitt leading the charge as press secretary or chief liar, that they just don't even appeal to rationality anymore. So whereas people always say that they're always ascribing, including Trump himself, all these superlatives to his presidency and his time in office, as well as his ascendancy to political power and authority in office, they're always describing these. It's the most amazing thing. It's the greatest thing. People have said it's the greatest event ever. All these unreal and fallacious superlatives. Really, it's the most feminine presidency ever because there's a total. It's all emotionalism. It's all undue and illogical reverence for the cult of person and engagement in the cult of personality. Fealty above all else is a virtue. So it's very submissive or demands submissiveness. It's extraordinarily feminine and effete at that. So anyway, just some thoughts there about Trump and Venezuela and the whole affair. I mean, he's renaming things like the Monroe Doctrine. He's doing things that he's calling it the Don Roe Doctrine. I mean, he doesn't even know what the Monroe Doctrine is. I, all of his advisors are morons, but for the most part. Um, at least in previous dictatorships and imperial reigns, dating back to, maybe even like Carter and Reagan, at least there were not Syria, there were serious people around them. Yeah. Nixon had Pat Buchanan, and Pat Buchanan would just be so embarrassed by the lack of just argumentation, lines of logic with non sequiturs flowing from complete incompatibility of argument and assertion, assertion as fact, something like that. That
Yeah.
he would just resign if he had to utter these things in public. But they just keep going on. Stephen Miller's going to be the L. Paul Bremer. Now you don't remember L. Paul Bremer, but he was the guy who was put in charge just because of his political connections of Iraq after the fall of Saddam Hussein. So now we have Stephen Miller doing the same thing. It's just repeated over and over again. It's not even rhyming. It's just a cacophony of bad repeated over and over again.
Where'd you come across this?
This article, the biggest
Yes.
winner in Venezuela, Paul the Vulture Singer. There is no coincidence in history. It's not just happenstance that things unfold as they do. There's causality, to be sure, in history, and this is no difference. This is a great article because Christopher Burnett, who is an investigative journalist, looked into what would be the what he calls later on. I have the note here. There is indeed a not just singular causality here, but it all transpired this engagement with Venezuela and the arrest and capture of Maduro and his wife. He says it happened in a crowded causal field. And yet, within that causal field are major influences that stand out or are more influential, let's say noisier than the other causes. And the recent presidential administrations including the various Congresses who just act more like lapdogs or faux opponents, combatants in this political theater. What is a hallmark of all of them in my lifetime, and certainly I would go so far as to say it's intensified in your own lifetime. What's a hallmark of them is that the billionaire class and their interests, their global interests, are not just protected, but they become priorities, the top and paramount priorities of these various administrations. And Paul Singer is just one individual in this whole cabal who's going to, and clearly has been, benefiting massively from the lobbying and use of Washington and the various levers of power that exist therein to ensure that his investments, no matter how risky, always end up coming up aces because, and this is the ultimate entrepreneur, this is the ultimate example of what, as I'll get to as we go through my notes here about the piece. It's the ultimate example of political entrepreneurship, and we'll talk about the differences between market and political entrepreneurs in the course of our analysis of the piece. So, what I was getting at was that the great strength of this article and why I want to focus on it so intensely in our podcast and our episode today is because this is a fantastic example of how history can inform to such an amazing degree what is transpiring at present in current events. And to the extent that it doesn't, as a discipline, inform and give us greater appreciation for the importance of transformative events and give us a greater insight and more educated worldview of what's transpiring, then it's failing as a discipline. It's failing as a discipline. So what I thought we could do is let's go through my summary of the article, and I want you to interject as we go through my notes uh, of the piece, and then we could have maybe even in the middle of our analysis, if it strikes you the mood, you could play that clip from the little comedic clip about the real analogous nature of this thing, and that's from Jamie Kaler and his Instagram. So the piece is entitled, and this is on his Substack. This is again Chris Burnett. The biggest winner in Venezuela, Paul the Vulture Singer. How sanctions, lawfare, and political influence delivered Venezuela's crown jewel into the hands of America's most feared investor. So, the major first argument that Burnett offers is that he wants to dispel us of this notion that when states fail and fracture, when they become when governments, which are the head monopoly of violence in any territory or country, when they devolve and fail and fracture, he says the assets do not vanish. We have this tendency to think of, well, the collected and aggregated wealth of a society, when the state falls, it's as though the wealth of that society dissipates. It goes into the ether somewhere when there's major political revolutions or alterations in the ruling operation. But that's not the case, of course. And they instead are often liquidated quietly, legally, and almost always at a steep discount. I love that line. They are liquidated quietly, legally, quasi-legally, I would argue, and at a steep discount. This is why, and I have this aside, my insight as I was reading this was that this is why Eastern Europe and the former republics, including Russia itself, of the former USSR after 1991 were so attractive to the largely cadaverizing forces of the West. So, as had been the case for really generations and decades and even centuries, the West's disposition to the East, Eastern Europe and Russia and by extension its empire, whether it was under the czars or then under the Bolsheviks, the control within the 20th century, there was always this avaricious desire to ensure that there was instability or a level of instability within these countries and societies so as to take advantage of and always have access to the resources which were in great and oftentimes in great abundance. So another instance within history comes from or that came to my mind as I was reading Burnett's piece was the story of Alexander Hamilton. Charlie won't be shocked, nor will most of our audience, that I have a rather negative account of Alexander Hamilton to relate here. And he was a bastard, but both literally and figuratively. But there's one episode that stands out, and that is you'll remember that when I teach the Constitution, one of the final clauses of the Constitution is that in the post-constitutional order, as the Articles of Confederation are shredded and replaced by this new federal union that's proposed to be ratified, one of Hamilton's absolute imperatives that is clear within the Constitution and included within it is that the United States will take on the totality of what was then the states and the federal government's debt. Now, the debt was the crushing economic problem that led to all of the chaos, supposed chaos, and worry, consternation that moved people to at least be open to a new federal order that would limit states' rights and create a much more powerful central government. Now, of course, what had happened after the Revolutionary War? And this isn't just, of course, the famous incident was Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts, but there were multiple rebellions throughout the colonies, then states in the aftermath of the Revolutionary War period. So with debt and the oftentimes the central government would have to pay as well as the state governments, but mostly the central government in terms of its debt would hand out to Revolutionary War veterans, for example. They would sell when they couldn't pay them, they would hand out what essentially were bonds. Yes. And these bonds, um, yeah, they were essentially would be war bonds or future promissory notes. And because of the economic decrepitude, let's call it, of the American states after the war, these bonds were being sold at, pennies on the dollar because no one believed that there would be any way for the government under the Articles of Confederation to pay for it. They didn't even have revenue raising power, you see. So what does Hamilton do? Now, he had a variety of motivations for assuming the debt. But central to it was, of course, that his own already well established and healed American class of elites would value from this venture, would gain value, immense value from this venture. So his cronies got wind that he was going to be successful in pushing through this initiative and codifying it in the new Constitution. So crony speculators, went out and started buying up these otherwise thought to be worthless bonds. And then what should happen? Oh, not only is the United States government going to raise taxes from things like the whiskey tax, which is another punitive measure, and from tariffs and the like, modest tariffs at the beginning. Well, guess what they're going to do? They're going to pay the entirety of the bond's principal with interest. It's
Right.
guaranteed. So what happens to the value of those bonds? They skyrocket. They skyrocket in value because now it's a security that is based on the legal success of the new federal government, right? So this is a way that he bilked mom and pop Joe Schmo American, dating back to the very foundations of the Union. Yeah. So there's Alexander Hamilton. Let's go on. Who is Paul Singer? Well, Paul Singer is the head of the hedge fund and venture capital firm Elliott Management. Charlie, do you remember the figure of what's the figure of assets under management and valuation of Elliott Management?
Currently manages, says right here, currently manages $78 billion worth of capital.
Yes, and that makes it one of the biggest hedge funds in the world. Yeah. His personal fortune ranks or puts him at 578th richest person on the globe. How does Elliott Management, as a hedge fund, tend to make money? Well, they take the corpses they take otherwise thought to be viable but struggling companies, particularly in the United States, and they they break it up. They break up these companies. It's a lot like if you've ever seen the movie Pretty Woman. What Richard Gere's character is doing. Yeah, they sell off subsidiaries or different parts of various companies. In the case of Singer, he was famous for doing this with GM, and then they fire staff. They fire especially what tend to be union workers, although they're not always union workers. So from Detroit to Sydney, Nebraska, big towns and small, he's laid waste to a lot of industry within the United States. And this is why Brunette calls his existence not one of a venture capitalist, but a vulture capitalist. And his vulture capital activities um, are supported and they only become possible. I wish Brunette would have, and maybe in a longer piece, he would defend the nature of the free market, but they're only possible through gaining the support, legislative, and then even through subsidies, i.e., monetary support, of the apparatchiks in Washington and the state capitals alike. In other words, he's the epitome of the political entrepreneur. And here's where we have to bring up Professor Burton Folsom. Folsom is rightly credited through his book, The Myth of the Robber Barons from 1991, and his previous work, Entrepreneurs versus the State, which, excuse me, was published 2 years earlier in 1989, with making the fundamental distinction of political or between political and market entrepreneurs. Now, do you remember the difference between those two groups?
Political entrepreneurs and market entrepreneurs. Well,
Right.
market entrepreneurs have to work within the free market and don't have the advantage that political entrepreneurs do of relationships with the government, relationships within the state,
Yes.
these, Chicago politics, backhanded or,
Hmm.
backdoor deals that get done in order to, something. The CITGO gets brought up later in the article. I'm sure you're going to talk
Yes.
about where
Hmm.
that's a perfect example of that, of
Good.
the political entrepreneur class.
Good. So a market entrepreneur has to engage in activities that, in Misesian and Rothbardian language, render the consumer king. In other words, a market entrepreneur takes on necessary risk so as to ensure that some need, some want, some desire of the general consumer class is sated, is satisfied. And it's through innovation, it's through engagement in healthy competition, it's through not dependency on any type of coercive action of the state that the market entrepreneur offers his good or service for the benefit of society at large. Should he fail in that, the responsibility of the failure falls upon him and the cost of that venture. Should he succeed, the benefices of that venture go to him as well, right? And it's from that position where he can reinvest or engage in other activities, including he is free, although it's not often the most in the long term advantageous position to accrue massive personal wealth for that reason alone. You see?
Right.
Now, a political entrepreneur has to operate in ways you'll remember the old sort of political entrepreneur or crony capitalist mantra. That is, capitalize all the gains and socialize all the risk. Capitalize all the gains, socialize all the risk. So, political entrepreneurs do not hesitate, the worst among them, to appeal to the coercive power of government to give them a leg up, preferential treatment, favoritism, cronyism, and using those relationships to ensure that they don't operate in a competitive, open, and free market, but rather are putting their fingers on the scales of both justice and the supposedly free economy to operate, right? So that's a fundamental distinction that people often don't make. I hear it all the time on Jimmy Dore's show. right? Yeah, I think I would go so far as to argue the only reason that Jimmy Dore is a socialist or tends toward being a leftist is because he just doesn't understand this fundamental distinction, and no one feels bold enough to tell it to
I think
him.
a lot of people fall in that category.
Right. Well, and there's nothing capitalistic. Again, capitalism being defined as just the economic system and prevailing activity in accordance with natural law. That's important for our from our perspective as Catholics, especially in which personal property is to be guarded and protected as a natural human right, rightly gained personal property, of course, and that men are free and ought to be free to engage in non coerced, free associative exchange. That's it. That's it. Yes. So anytime there's the introduction of government subsidy or legislation or regulation or cronyism into the equation, that dispels and just totally wrecks the idea of capitalism. Or more so, not wrecks the idea, but wrecks the operation of it. It no longer exists as such. And this, Mises made this point in a great essay and series of speeches, which he entitled "The Middle Road is Socialism." The middle road is socialism, because the moment that you compromise on the right to of individuals to personal property, or the moment you introduce the toxins or cancers of cronyism and collectivism, just to the minutest degree, you're already conceding so much and so um, sickening, let's call it, sickening the operation of capitalism and catalactics, which is the other, that's kind of the fancy term for the operation of the market, catalactics, that you don't have capitalism anymore. You see, it's like if you wanted pure um, milk, but you put a drop of chocolate into it. Well, you do to have some degree have chocolate milk. You don't have pure milk anymore.
Right.
It frustrates the whole system. Okay, so let me go on because I have a bunch of notes here. Oh, there we are. Here we are. Um, let's see.
Is there a part of this you want me to skip to?
Uh, no, I mean, well, oh yeah, we already went over to Sydney, Nebraska because that's already brought up. Okay, here's where he talks about um his history as operating an extortion racket. So let me go through this. And what Brunette's talking about here is that what a large part of his business modeling or business model for Elliott as the CEO of Elliott Management was engaging in sovereign debt acquisition. Now, sovereign debt acquisition is a risky game. Yeah. If you want small but assured returns, you invest in countries that have shown themselves to have stability and a means by which of respecting, for example, the property rights of corporations, domestic and foreign, for operating within that country, for example. Yes. And so in 2000, he had engaged in a lot of speculation in buying up Peruvian debt. And he was so powerful, in fact, that when then President Alberto Fujimori of Peru attempted to essentially escape the country, go back to where his parents were from, was Japan. And then Fujimori was set to, he actually resigned the presidency via fax. I don't know if anyone else has done that or has done that
Wow.
since.
Yeah.
But because Fujimori was seen as the lone US and US magnate guarantor of American investment within the country, Singer actually had his plane detained in the process, like stopped him from taking off. Think about the power of someone who's just supposed to be a private businessman engaged in that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. 2009. It's the famous story of GM and Delphi. Essentially, as you read, and for those who I encourage everyone to read the entire of the piece, in the midst of the GFC, great financial crisis, sorry, in the aftermath of it, GM started to sell off some of its subsidiaries. One of the companies was a parts manufacturer that they eventually named Delphi. So what ends up happening was at suppressed valuations, Elliott Management swept in and bought up Delphi, and Delphi was a major part supplier to GM, and in fact, all of the U.S. domestic auto manufacturers. So what does Singer do along with his aides? He threatens the then Obama administration, saying, "We're with this, cut off we're going to cut off all production of parts going into the and by the way, when Management purchased the majority of the shares of Delphi, which was a former subsidiary and then branched off, excuse me, the stock was worth, it was a penny stock. It was worth 67 cents per share. So with this threat, the Obama administration, by the way, Secretary of Treasury at the time said it was pure extortion. So uh, he they essentially extort from the Obama administration $12 billion to get the parts manufactured again. So the $12 billion is then used. So not only did they get the subsidy of the $12 billion to get the parts manufactured again, right? By the way, it's also to be noted that a lot of the manufacturing would eventually go on in China, where most of the jobs were shipped. Excuse me. So they get the parts, they get the money, and then Delphi's stock rose to $22. You see,
It's from 60 cents. From
yeah,
60
and I
cents.
forgot the total take was in the $160 million range or $1 billion range for Elliott Management, and his personal take was over a billion and a half dollars from this whole socialist. It's really a socialistic or more corporatistic move. Okay. Meanwhile, the jobs were shipped over to China and the country was liquidated in the end anyway. In 2015, he did similar things with Samsung. And in fact, he got Samsung, which had produced cartoons showing that there were Jewish
I
entrepreneurs
just
and bankers.
I just added up. This is it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it says here in 2015, as part of a dispute between Singer and Samsung, Samsung published several cartoons of him as an anthropomorphic vulture taking apart the country. Right, so there he is. And the cartoons were denounced by the ADL very quickly as anti-Semitic, and Samsung was forced to apologize to the ADL, as the ADL has that power to do so for major corporations, even if they're located in Seoul, South Korea. So he then has this power to bring companies to their knees. 2016, he sued the Republic of the Congo in, of course, sub-Saharan Africa, and he was engaged in 15 lawsuits in criminal and global courts, international courts. And the country of the Congo, the government had to pay for these lawsuits or engage in them while the entire country was undergoing a food shortage. So there was rampant starvation in the country. 2016, he uh, ensured that his investment in Argentine debt was made and paid full. And then 2025, guess what? He had become a major owner and investor in CITGO. CITGO being the Venezuelan governmental owned oil company. So he goes on in the next part of the piece to say how Singer stole Venezuela's crown jewel. And the crown jewel, of course, is oil. This is wild. So Citgo was recognized forever since I shouldn't say forever, since the Hugo Chavez regime and then Maduro as his successor, as being a nationalized oil company. In fact, Chavez's rise to power as a socialist dictator was based upon his argumentation that these Western companies and billionaire financiers are bilking the Venezuelan people of its most abundant and valuable natural resource, that being oil, and they're doing so. And then, so therefore, if he campaigned on nationalizing it and the oil industry, and he did, you see. But that didn't stop, by the way, crafty or non-adverse, risk welcoming, I suppose, investors worldwide from engaging in investment in this very, well, of course, nationalized, but of course, shady company. All right. So what ended up happening was a few months ago, and this kind of flew under the radar, I forget what entity claimed this, but essentially they said Maduro had sold, or they forced the sale of Citgo, right? So it maybe go back to the article. He explains this better than I could even summarize. Um, yeah. So the sale of, yeah, it says here, this, oh, wait, move up a bit. So About a month ago, in November of 2025, a U.S. judge, there it was, a U.S. judge approved the sale of Citgo Petroleum Company, um, a subsidiary of Venezuela's state-owned oil company, Amber Energy, or to Amber Energy, a subsidiary of Paul Singer's Elliott Management. Now think about this.
Right.
So they forced the sale of a company, and it's not just any foreign company. It's a foreign company that's owned by the government of that state or of that country. So of course, Venezuela, imagine that, right? So think of this would be akin to France saying that, oh, by the way, GM, which is General or is Government Motors, right? Because the government subsidizes it so heavily and then handed it over post great financial crisis to the auto workers unions in large part. But in any case, say France coming in and saying, or Macron saying, oh, by the way, uh, a French hedge fund has now acquired GM. You just don't know it yet. And what authority do we have this? Well, a French judge said it so. Right? It's legally acquired it. Now, Venezuela, of course, immediately rejected the legitimacy of the sale, with the Maduro administration calling it a, in quote, fraudulent process, a barbaric theft and theft of the century. So you can continue on down. All right. And then he shows the corporate structure of CITGO. All right. Now, how does the, Paul Singer is not some great businessman. He's not the Oracle of Omaha, right? He's not Warren Buffett. He is more so Nancy Pelosi with more money, more power, and more connections. You see? So why did they see this as an advantageous move and having this judge rule this? Well, the valuation of Citgo had reached a very low ebb, and that Elliott Management could buy it at a much reduced price of $5.9 billion. Now, what caused its valuation to go so low? Whereas the an independent bank called Evercore Bank, when it was called up to appraise Citgo, valued it at more than two times that at 13 billion. Of course, U.S. sanctions and the fact that there was a paucity of investors going into that, both because of the risk involved, but more so because of U.S. sanctions had pared down and excluded external investment in the Venezuelan oil industry. So the Venezuelan government came up with a valuation of around $20 billion for the company. But what should have been a sale turned into a clearance. So in any event, what should have been or could have been a sale. Of course, notice that none of the partners on the Venezuelan side are agreeing to any of this, but let's say they did for a moment to sell the company. What could have been and should have been a sale turned into a clearance event with one vulture left standing. And that, of course, was Paul Singer. He's got, think about that. He's got 100%. He's able to, without competition, bid for the company, for the nationalized oil company that is CITGO, or subsidiary of the Venezuelan company, create out of thin air his own energy company, which was just, what was it, Amber Energy or something like that, and say Amber Energy has now purchased it for this much reduced price. Of course, the question would then be, because Maduro and the Venezuelan government could say, well, fuck you. I mean, you're not going to get the oil. So therefore, your stake or claim to the company is null and void. It's not effective. So, of course, what does he do? Paul Singer lobbies and is a major contributor to the Republican Party, to Trump himself, as we're going to see in a moment, and to all these other think tanks that have been calling for regime change in Venezuela for really the past several years, if not decades, right? From Brunet himself, he says his business does not at all depend on growth, innovation, or productive investment. Instead, of course, it depends upon the utilization through lobbying, cajoling, even threat, to ensure that the mechanisms of the federal government in Washington ensure that his, well, investments always come up roses. This is the essence of crony capitalism, is it not? And to be sure, this is the part where Brunet says this wasn't done just for Singer. There were a multiplicity of causes that brought this about. Okay, from the traditional hatred of the socialist regime. I mean, it should be noted too that among the South American states, Maduro and before him Chavez were the most anti-Israel. They were ones who recognized the Palestinian state, always campaigning for Palestinians and the like. So this raised this raised the ire of Zionists, especially, and Jewish influencers and investors in the United States and beyond. Okay. Now, this is where Brunette goes into the 7 ways that Singer is able to exert such influence that he could at least be a major player in influencing the invasion of a country and bring about war against a foreign and sovereign state and its leader. Okay, so let me list these. He says, one, he owns, that is Singer, a paper in Washington, the Washington Free Beacon. And that Washington Free Beacon is just a mouthpiece for all of this desire for regime change in Venezuela. And he lists the various articles over the course of the last just 2 months that have served to emphasize that Maduro has to go, right? And that the United States military ought to be deployed to do so. And notice that the underlying theme here too is that the sources that he quotes are like Ben Shapiro saying that, well, Tucker Carlson's wrong to defend. Look at the title of the example E here, Charlie. He says it says Ben Shapiro
I
savages
saw
Tucker
this.
Carlson's defense of commie drug lord Nicolas Maduro. I mean, you might as well cue up the Lee Daniels song and say I'm proud to be an American because at least I know I'm free. And you're not free. You're at the behest or acting at the behest of billionaire vulture-capitalists. Okay. Secondly, he is the chairman emeritus of the Manhattan Institute and has donated over $10 million to that think tank since its inception in 2011. And he's used the Manhattan Institute to, as you page down here, push the steady stream of propaganda against Maduro and any others who would be acting or saying that regime change operations, which Trump was supposed to be so against. This is Bush doctor, or this is George W. Bush rehashed. It's the resurrection of Donald Rumsfeld and John McCain, of course. No matter who you vote for, we always get John McCain. Well, it's the Manhattan Institute who was pushing this. Third way, he is a major donor to the, in quote, think of this title. Is there a title for a think tank that's more contrary to anarcho-capitalism? Or Hans Hermann Hoppe just lays awake at night and uh, this is a nightmare for him. He's a major donor to what's called the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Uh, all that is just pushing this line that, of course, he says here they published 8 articles with the subtle titles such as "A Free Venezuela Elevates U.S. Energy Security." Okay, um, so number 4, he's given $1 million to the campaign against Thomas Massey. I'm so sorry. My throat is
Yeah, I can read some of these if
yeah,
you
please go ahead.
you've been talking for you've been talking
Give
for
my
a
voice a
while.
break. I'm just
Yeah, get some
pretty
water,
animated
man.
about this.
Get some water. Number 4, Paul Singer is currently funding via a $1 million donation a vicious primary campaign against Congressman Thomas Massey, who is, quote, one of the most vocal opponents in Congress to Trump's regime change push in Venezuela, joining Democrats to co-sponsor multiple failed war powers resolutions that would have reigned in the president's ability to launch military strikes and alleged drug boats in the Caribbean and launch an attack on mainland Venezuela.
There you go. And Massey's right to point out that, and he tweeted about this just what was that on the 4th of January? Singer and his globalist Republican mega donors is one of the globalist Republican mega donors, one of the 3, including Miriam Adelson, whose allegiance is not to the United States but to Israel, of course. And so this is just a it's just a faux corporate campaign and Zionist campaign against the one true American congressman. That's Thomas Massey. All right, 5th way. He totally backs Marco Rubio. He and Marco Rubio are just hand in glove. And Marco Rubio, also nicknamed Narco Rubio, Marco Rubio, who's neck deep in actual narco um, funding for his political ascendancy. It's just ridiculous, the hypocrisy. Okay, number 6. And Marco Rubio, just like John McCain, has never seen a war he doesn't want to fight or have someone else and your sons and daughters fight. Number 6, he's given, this is Paul Singer, $5 million to Trump, and he's met in person with Trump at least 4 times without having known him previously. And then the 7th point, he's given $3 million to, oh, you guessed it, to AIPAC since 2022. He's the 3rd largest donor to AIPAC as an individual. All right, beyond, of course, Israel itself. All right. Uh, what Brunette forgot to mention. This is
Mm.
interesting. E. Michael Jones came to the rescue a little bit here. Do you know what's wild? Singer is the most avid and chief financial supporter of the Philos Project. Do you know what the Philos Project is? It's
The
Philos.
PHIOS. No, but I think when you say it, I'll remember.
Okay, the Philos Project, founded in 2014, is a organization that was created to, in essence, create greater political, social, and religious ties between American Christians and Jews. So, what APAC is for representing purely Jewish interests and ensuring that, for example, American Jews, especially young American Jews, go off on those trips to Israel and they get to make out with hot IDF soldiers. And Max Blumenthal mentioned that he, as a young Jew, in his, I think it was his late teens, went on one of these Israeli trips funded by the Israeli government, APAC and the like. Well, Philos does this with Christians. And he, if you will allow me to be crude for a moment, while Max Blumenthal was obviously getting hit on by these hot Israeli women, and he just went to bed, his roommate was receiving oral sex on the balcony of their room from an IDF, a female soldier. So these are just, and there's a whole series of reports you can look at about how this is meant to foster and create more Israelis, more Jews to inhabit Israel eventually, and settlements that are growing in the West Bank, for example, and eventually maybe Gaza too. But now the Philos Project does these things vis-a-vis um, Christianity. Now, is there outreach to Catholics in particular? Yes, there is. There's a Philos Catholic wing.
What?
Yep.
There's a branch?
Yep. Yeah. Hmm. And they have their own CEO. I forgot her name. I wrote it down because I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole with her. Her name is, shoot, you can look it up. It's Rizbala. Yeah. Sheila Rizbala or something like that. You can look it up.
I got it.
Yeah, Philos Project or Philos Catholic.
Simone Rizkala.
Rizkala, that's it. Simone Rizkala. Graduated with a graduate degree in theology from Catholic University in Washington. Went to teach high school in Phoenix, Arizona. Weird things going on in Phoenix and the surrounding suburbs, right? Was there a connection to Erica Franze? No, it doesn't appear to be. But that they run in seriously overlapping circles is pretty clear. Okay. So that for those of you who think that, well, did this woman teach then Erica Franze, nay Franze, now Kirk? No, she taught at St. Mary's. This, what's her name?
Rizkala? Simone
Rizkala.
Rizkala?
Yeah, Rizkala. And, but they went to, Erica Kirk went to Notre Dame in Scottsdale, and this Rizkala taught at St. Mary's in Phoenix. All right. Then she becomes the head of the Philos Catholic. So that's what's going on there. So what does this all amount to? This is just all grand legalized plunder. And it's just no different than the imperial modus operandi of all of those terrible former empires that we as Americans are supposed to shake and wag our finger at, right? Oh, how could it be anything but disrespectful for the Germans to go into Namibia and lay waste to African tribes and take away their resources? Or how, yeah, well, guess what? The United States is engaged in that on a scale that makes the British Empire look minute. So enough of this. I mean, it just is a constant reinforcement, Charlie, that we should not and ought not have earthly human rulers and archons over us. If you believe that the United States system of government is supposed to be the one that brings about liberty and we're the land of the free and home of the brave, you are not. You are not. You're enslaved to this system, and it's constantly expansionist. It's constantly imperialistic. And I mean, I forget who said it. It was Dave Cullum the other day. I was reading his Twitter. He goes, it just appears that, and notice how this all is sped up and accelerated because for those of you who are aware of what's going on in the sort of finance world, the biggest trade over the last year was what? The debasement trade. You have sovereign currencies that are just inflating themselves into destruction and oblivion. Precious metals have skyrocketed, gold, silver, platinum, you name it. And what's happening as a result? Well, there's got to be other revenue sources to feed the beast. Well, let's just expropriate, nationalize, and it's so easy to do that because think about all the sanctions and the policies that have diminished the actual true value of these entities, and then you could just go in by force and by the fiat of a domestic judge and just expropriate those things. And now, of course, you're not. Is there any real talk? I mean, there's some reference to it that the money's going to go to the Venezuelan people. It's like, are you kidding? I mean, this is laughable. The oil's ours. The oil's ours. What is this? What is this? And there's no uh, equanimity here. There's no balance. Correct? There's no like, what's this? What's to stop other countries from doing this
Yeah.
at all or all of the time? We got to appeal to the Geneva Conventions or something like that. I mean, after you do these things, this is the military equivalent to um when after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Fed seized and froze Russian assets and expropriated Russian assets, even if they were denominated in, for example, uh, U.S. bonds and securities, right? Because once you take and you don't allow Russian companies to operate and gain, for example, capital through SWIFT and the international recognized system of exchange, right? Well, then the whole system, the whole foundation of Bretton Woods and the United States serving as an impartial arbiter, as the sovereign looking over the reserve currency, becomes null and void just because you anger the manipulator in chief politically. I mean, that had never been done before. That had never been done before. So, yeah, I think the world's waking up to this.
Wow. Anything else?
Well, should we? Maybe people aren't convinced of our take on this. Should we play the?
Yeah, let's do this.
Here we go.
I had some friends of mine execute a raid on my neighbor Tom's house. He put up quite a fight, but we got through, and he's in custody. I haven't liked what he's been doing over there for a while now, so I've decided to run his house myself. He leaves his Christmas lights up too long. He never trims his avocado tree that hangs over my fence, and I believe he's running fentanyl out of there. I can't prove the last one, but it makes sense. I've seen him speak Spanish. I got rid of the wife as well. I didn't really have a problem with her, but we did do a 4th of July block party, and she brought empanadas, so better safe than sorry. I've got them at a residence inn a couple towns over. I've been using his home as my own little man cave. Pretty great. It turns out he has a fantastic wine cellar that I have tapped into extensively. Anyway, I'll be running his home until a time when I can have a safe, proper, and judicious turnover to some other guy, which probably won't be happening soon. And just a heads up, I plan to take over some other neighbors' homes as well. Phil, across the street, has a pretty cool car I'd like to be in charge of. And Alex, who lives catty corner from me, has a wife who's a yoga instructor. Be taking that one soon. Again, doing it for the good of the neighborhood, so stay tuned.
It's perfect.
It's a little lighter note to all we talked about.
It says, and Tom's got a fantastic wine cellar, which I'm going to definitely take a part in. Yeah.
He's got a hot wife.
The
over
wife's
there.
she's got a yoga studio. That's next. I'll be over there soon. Yeah, it's fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah. It is funny when you say things. You made a half joke at the end about the Geneva Convention.
Mm,
And then I also laughed at when you said that Singer's not a great businessman. It's just amazing how imbalanced all this is.
sure.
That it's so laughable that we even come up with these ideas. Like some people might think that the more money you make, the better an entrepreneur you are, and it's just a direct correlation. And
Mm.
since Singer's within the top 600, he must be a top 600 entrepreneur or wealth creator or whatever. And
No, he's top 600 connected. And that's what's so, as you look take a step back and look at this whole thing, it's an odd. What I thought Brunette drove home so well is that look, the way in which credit is supposed to function and proper investment, let's call it market entrepreneurial investment in foreign ventures, especially in the developing world, would be that you would be rewarded if you as a people in society proved yourselves credit worthy, just like an individual would prove himself credit worthy through industry, through the wealth you've accrued, through, in a Rothbardian sense, mixing your labor with the resources at hand so as to produce a good or product or service of value in the marketplace. And building up that reputation would then create a kind of magnetism of credit toward that so you could engage in further entrepreneurial venture. Let's say, as a country as Venezuela is very rich in natural resources, once one of the wealthiest countries in the world, per capita and even just in basic conditions, monetary low misery index, you name it, in the world in the 1950s, just like Argentina, for example. By the way, Venezuela, do you know what that means in Spanish?
Espanol?
Yeah,
No.
it just means little Venice because it has so many cataracts and tributaries and canals and stuff like that, and rivers. So when the Spanish arrived, they said, "Oh, this looks like Little Venice, it's Venezuela." Excuse me. So if that's the case, and you have this sanctions and really muscular anti-capitalistic country, which is the United States, that always trumpets how capitalistic it is, but in reality is suppressing the valuation and the ability of countries, whether they deem themselves socialist or not, doesn't really matter, to engage in true association and free association and market exchange. In a way, if you want to personify or just allow for the personification of nations, the human capital or the let's call it the national capital of a people never gets fully expressed. Its potentiality is always suffocated as a result of that. And it seems as though the more that you, in a natural way or logical way, as a nation or a state representing that nation, a nation state, react adversely to that imperial uh, economic imperialism against the United States, the more you become a target of acquisition. You incur its wrath. And Venezuela's time ran out. Its
Yeah.
its assets were so unnaturally depreciated, and therefore it became even more attractive to vulture capitalism and the vulture capitalist par excellence, and that's Paul Singer in this case.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Do you
There
want to
we
talk
are.
about Venezuela, or do you want to talk about a town that could really use some regime change?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the town, but just one more thing about Venezuela. This whole idea that it's the drug boats. Oh, come on, man. I mean, you know what's wild too? One thing I totally forgot and left out. You know, there is a country where the vast majority of illegal drugs entering the United States comes from. A country that is much larger than Venezuela in terms of population, and more so, is actually the head of government is the de facto representative of massively powerful drug cartels existing within the country. So much so that her entire elevation to the presidency came about because the drug cartels killed the other 27 contenders for the presidency. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And that's Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico City. But you don't hear anything about that because the United States hasn't suppressed Mexican assets to an attractive degree yet. Yet. We'll see how it continues.
You want to talk about the town?
Yeah, let's go to Oak Park.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
We should go to your gay suburb now.
Here it is, People segment. Meanwhile in Oak Park, brought to you by Tridentine Brewing.
Mm.
Had a couple Tridentines over the holiday break. It was nice.
Delicious.
The best. Making gun manufacturers accountable. We'll start with the letters to the editor. by
In for
Ed
2026 for
by
sure.
by Ed McDevitt. Sadly, our society's obsession with guns, a national health issue, results daily in many deaths from easy access to killing machines. In Illinois, multiple community and statewide organizations work diligently at stemming that violence. Many of the organizations, small and large, advocate successfully for sensible gun legislation. One of the important pieces of proposed legislation is the so-called Rifle, RIFL, Responsibility in Firearm Legislation Act. This proposed bill, SB 2279 in the Illinois Senate and HB 3320 in the House, aims to correct a major cost imbalance. Illinois taxpayers and citizens pay billions of dollars each year for the damage gun violence does to people in our communities. Rifle seeks both to require Illinois licenses for gun manufacturers who sell their wares in the state and to collect funds for direct victim assistance from those manufacturers.
Okay.
We citizens play multiple roles with respect to such legislation. One such role is simply becoming aware of the legislation
I'm aware.
and its importance so that we can collectively take action.
Collectively. Oh, we gotta do so collectively.
That's why multiple gun responsibility organizations are sponsoring an Oak Park town hall on the rifle bill at 7 p.m. on January 13th at Oak Park Public Library in the Veterans Room. Please set aside the time to come and listen to the discussion and learn about what you can do. We know that once the bills are brought up in legislative committees, we'll need as many supporters as possible to submit witness slips. It's easy and quick online. We hope to see you at Oak Park Main Library on January 13th. We will not be there. We will not be there.
Yeah, we should go, but here we are.
Local Venezuelan immigrants react to Maduro's capture. Emotions include happiness, shock, uncertainty, sadness, anxiety, which are most human emotions right there.
Yes, there you go. The gamut, running the gamut.
Saturday morning came early for CM. About 1 a.m., friends of hers from college in Venezuela began frantically texting her that something was happening in her home country, which she had departed in October 24 due to its leader, Nicolas Maduro. She proceeded to the social media platform X, and what she saw was astounding. There were helicopters and explosions over the nation's capital, Caracas. My initial reaction was, "This is AI," said CM. So I guess they're not saying her full name. Said CM,
Right.
who lives in Oak Park with her parents. One State Journal is choosing not to use her last name for protection. Quote, "I started to watch more videos. This is actually happening." I assumed the helicopters were from the US. I waited, then my friends didn't give me any updates, so I went to sleep. When she awoke at 6 a.m., her friends were excitedly sharing the news. They were laughing that Maduro had been captured, she said. They were happy. I was happy. So many years we've been waiting. Then the reality set in. Happiness became shock, then uncertainty for CM and her parents. Quote, "One thing happening is that Maduro was captured," she said. "The government is still there and the people are still in power. How is that going to backfire for the people in Venezuela?"
Yeah, what are you celebrating then?
Juan,
His vice president took power. I mean,
Juan, another Venezuelan immigrant who has frequented the migrant ministry of the Catholic parishes of Oak Park at St. Edmund's School, agreed. The migrant ministry of the Catholic.
yeah, remember that was what we had covered.
Yeah, I remember. Quote,
Yeah.
"As soon as we found out, we were able to notify our family members since many were unaware of what had happened at that moment," Juan said. Wednesday Journal is not using his real name for his protection. Quote, "For us, it was a moment of
Why'd they choose
anxiety."
Juan? Hmm? Huh? Sounds like they're profiling.
Quote, "For us, it was a moment of anxiety and uncertainty, thinking about all the things that could happen to the many people who were near the scene of the events. It was a moment of sadness, joy, and great anxiety, just remembering everything that many Venezuelans have had to go through to keep fighting."
They're even talking like Oak Parkers. They've only been there for so long.
Another
Been a wild journey.
another Venezuelan immigrant who said she was, quote, bewildered by the
No,
events
she
in her home
didn't. She
country
didn't. I'll take Alex, I'll take for 500 things that never happened.
was Yvette. Wednesday Journal is also not using her real name for her protection.
She's
Current
French.
current conditions on the ground in Venezuela range from precarious to outright dangerous. Quote, "I was talking to many of my relatives, and they say there's a lot of tension, worry, and fear among the people about the possibility of a second invasion," she said. There are police in the streets, and those who are there can't talk about Maduro's capture because they'll be arrested. That's the new law there because they say it's treason.
Hmm. Sounds like a great situation in the United States and
Quote,
created.
most businesses are closed because they are afraid, to put it more clearly, that they will be looted because there might be an uprising.
Oh, well, you know what? Basically, it sounds like Fallujah, Iraq in 2004, right?
CM said that civilians have to be wary of the colectivos, an informal group that supports the current regime that attacks people who do not support Maduro's political party. Quote, people are happy this finally happened, but you can't go out in the streets and celebrate, she said. It's like a silent celebration.
Yeah, and how shameful it is of all these, the Alex Jones types and the Lindsey Grahams and all these neocon bastards and everyone showing these old videos of Venezuelans or Venezuelan exiles in Miami celebrating. Well, this good on the Wednesday Journal of actually finding out from displaced migrant Venezuelans what's going on really, and that they're not celebrating because they face repercussions. Yeah.
Yvette added that people are still in prison for thinking differently from Maduro's regime. Many things happen, but I also have to say that the regime hasn't fallen yet because some of them are still there. As long as they remain in power, Venezuela will not be free. Juan said there is disappointment among his family members in Venezuela about what had happened. Quote, they simply believe it's all a show orchestrated by the US, and they are disappointed because the same corrupt and drug trafficking elite remains in power, he said. We have a transparent government we want a transparent government that will end corruption, enact laws that are respected, and remove from power those who have done so much to harm Venezuela. I don't know if you're going to get that from a government.
No, you're not going to get that. Sorry, pal. And you're certainly not going to get it from, we're running Venezuela now. We're taking over the country.
Yvette said the beacon of hope for Venezuelan immigrants locally has been the migrant ministry, known among them as Centro San Edmundo. Thanks to their generosity, many have found a home and unconditional support during these times of need. She said, their commitment and dedication are a true gift to us and to all immigrants. CM not only participates in the migrant ministry, she is also a volunteer working in the area of immigrant support services, filling out asylum applications.
None of them have real jobs, but go ahead.
Not only did the migrant ministry help her father with his own asylum application, it gave him something else.
Not a job.
Quote, the courage to tell his story, she said. They have
And what's more
helped us-
valuable?
They have helped us. They have helped us build a community here and give us a hand. They have been a huge part of our journey here.
Almost, yeah, a huge part of your journey. Essential.
This is the last one. OP police still striving for 116 sworn officers by mid-2026. Oak Park police staff grew by 6 sworn officers in back half of 2025, but the department still has a ways to go to reach staffing target. The Oak Park Police Department made progress in officer staffing last year, but the force is still far from fully staffed. Oak Park Police Chief Shatanya Johnson told Wednesday Journal in April that the department had 86 sworn officers with the goal of getting to 116 by mid-2026. That's 30 new.
Yeah.
The OPPD finished 2025 with 92 sworn officers on staff and is still eyeing 116 as a goal for the coming months, according to the Village. In 2019, the department had 109 sworn officers. According to the police department's annual report for 2025, 2024 brought the greatest amount of officer turnover that the department's seen in recent years. The department hired 19 new officers that year, but lost 20 to either retirement or resignation, ending 2024 with 85 officers on staff. Quote, we're just doing a huge push, Shatanya Johnson told Wednesday Journal in an interview last April. I am personally outside recruiting every day. I'm not in the police department. In response to the hiring deficit, Oak Park has changed officer compensation and benefits to try and bring more police recruits into the fold, including salary increases, generous family leave offerings, $4,000 sign-on bonuses to recruits who earn spots as patrol officers, retention bonuses, and approved hiring for lateral transfers from other police departments, Johnson said. Wow. The department will also operate with a larger budget this year, in part due to increased funding for recruiting. Refund the police.
Yeah, you stole my thought and the words right out of my mouth.
Increased funding for recruiting. That's a funny way of phrasing it too. staffing.
Yeah.
In total, the department payroll will operate with a budget of 30,159,380 this year, up by more than a million from 2025. The increase over last year is driven primarily by staff salaries and benefits increases. The department is now asking for a $40,000 increase to its budget for background checks in anticipation of increased hiring next year. The department's pension contribution is increasing by
Ooh,
637,159 next year, as the department's fringe benefits funding goes up by more than 855,000.
Wow.
Personnel compensation is set to go up by 261,483 as laid out in the police department's collective bargaining agreement.
Those are some out of control costs.
And then there was a woman arrested for child endangerment and DUI in Oak Park on Christmas Eve. Sad.
Yeah.
So,
Although to be fair, she wasn't from Oak Park. She was from Northwest Indiana. Right.
Oak Park police stopped the 20. Yes. That's the people segment.
That's it.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
What would have happened if I'd gone for it and just said, no, I'm gay?
So there you have it.
Good episode. Felt like I was back in the classroom going through all the history and how it
Yeah.
relates to today.
Except I couldn't talk. So
What did something change from the time you taught to now? You didn't used to cough that much, right?
no, I suspect that because maybe my vocal cords were more, I don't know.
And you're standing up.
That's true. I was standing up when I was teaching, but I don't think it has anything to do with that. I think in large part it's just I don't talk all day. So when we come on the podcast, it's like you're putting a lot of strain
Not
on
as
them.
conditioned.
Yeah, not as conditioned. That was the word. Yeah. So the raspiness kind of kicks in. So and no matter what I do, I try the water. Didn't really work.
Yeah.
So oh well. Well, I'll be better. I'll be better next time, Charlie.
No, I thought it was great. That was great.
Okay. So that's it.
Yeah, that's it. Get you some Tridentine beers and we'll keep praying.
Amen. We'll look forward to some guests coming on soon.
Oh, absolutely. Let's go.
All right. Talk to you then. Bye.
All right, everyone. God bless.